And I'm excited about our presentation this month. I work with Will, he's a good friend, and I love the work that he does with the bike ride, also as assistant editor of the Cherokee Phoenix newspaper. He was on the bike ride in 1984, the first bike ride, and so he's going to give us a little bit of a history on what that was like. And he's also been coordinator for the Remember the Removal bike ride for the past few years. And today he's brought Kaya Holmes. She was a 2025 rider, and she's from Tahlequah. Kaya? All right, thank you for being here. And then also Jenny Cleese, she was a 2025 rider, and she's from Stillwell, so thank you for being here as well. And Will give a little bit more introduction to them once they come up. So everybody, please give a warm welcome to Will Chavez.
I got to give props to Todd too here. He brought the ride. He helped to bring the ride back in 2009. It was dormant from '84 till 2009, and then Todd worked hard to get it back on, get it back for the tribe, and get us going again for on the ride. And it's been going since, except for in 2020 during the COVID period. Well, though for being here to learn more about the bike ride. I've done the ride a couple times. First ride in 1984, 41 years ago now. I was 17, and then again as the first official mentor rider in 2017. Both times were challenging and life-changing. The first time I spent a lot of time just trying to survive the ride, like I think most of my teammates. It was tough, and we didn't know we were blazing a trail for future RTR rides. We thought, that might be the only one. It was for a while, but I'm glad it came back because it is a really beneficial program for our youth. The 2000 ride was challenging and pushed me to my limits a couple of times out, especially in Missouri. Missouri is always rough for everyone. But I can say I was prepared for the 17 ride, and I was 50 years old at the time, so I had to train extra hard to get ready because I had nightmares about the kids waiting on me out there. I didn't want them waiting on me on the trail. But for the first ride in 1984, we were basically out there to remind the American public that our people were forced from their homes in Georgia and Tennessee, Alabama, and North Carolina in 1838 and walked over 800 miles to get here. Every chance we got, we spoke about the ancestors and their struggles, and we also advocated for the trails that they used to get here to be marked by the National Park Service. I think we helped with that cause because Congress passed funding to mark the trails in 1987, 3 years after the ride. Most of all, I think the ride's founder, Michael Moores, wanted the 19 youth who took part in that first ride to see their strengths and to see that, to set the foundation for them to become leaders of the Cherokee Nation. Planning for the ride began in 1983 when Mike formed a committee to discuss how the ride could be done and what needed to happen. Mike called people he knew all over the country. He's quite the talker. And people he didn't know to ask for donations of equipment and funding for the ride. And youth from the leadership program at the time raised funds. They sold t-shirts and buttons and things to raise money for the ride. We did receive donations from Cannondale Bikes. Got some really nice bikes. Quaker Oats gave us a lot of granola bars. Their first granola bars that I guess were made, they tasted like cardboard. Gatorade, the first variations of Gatorade, we got a bunch of packets of those. And others funded the trip, but we still didn't have much of a budget when we left. And nowadays we train from December through May to get ready for this ride. It's almost 1,000 miles these days. Back then we did 1,200 miles. So without much knowledge about the physical stress we would be undertaking, we we only had 3 training rides here in this area before we left, which is amazing to think about. We were asked to train on our own, and sometimes that's hard to do when you don't really know what muscles you're supposed to be working or how you're supposed to be getting ready. But what I did was just run up and down a hill by my mom's house, up and down, just to burn my legs and get those ready. So we left in late May from Tahlequah, and we camped in Cherokee, North Carolina for a few days and met elders and met other people there. Just explored Cherokee for a few days, and then in early June we took off from Cherokee, which I wouldn't recommend. It was kind of a scary ride going through what they call the gorge, coming out of North Carolina into Tennessee. It's scary now. Even the road's better now, but it took us a month to get home using the northern route. See if I can get this to work. The northern route starts here and goes up all the way through Tennessee, Kentucky, southern Illinois, Missouri, down into Arkansas, and then back here. Back then, we cut off near Jackson and came down this green route here, which is the binge route, and cut through northern Arkansas. So it wasn't any easier because we still rode through places like Mountain View, Mountain Home. We were still in the Ozarks, so it was still pretty rough to get to Fayetteville. And then we had a major crash near Fayetteville the day before we got to Stillwell, and I got pretty banged up. We had to piece my bike together using other bikes that we had, extra bikes. Mike Morris, the person I mentioned earlier, he broke his collarbone. So I looked like a mummy riding into Stillwell the next day because I was so bandaged up. But I always think about those people I was with, and we still stay in contact, most of us, because of what we survived. I think it just it's created a strong bond. For a lot of the trip, we were hungry because of lack of funding. Like I mentioned earlier, we just didn't have that much funding, but I think most of us thought that was part of the experience. We were supposed to be hungry. That wasn't the case. We just didn't have the money for that much food. I lost 30 pounds that month. And we camped outside nearly every night. So when it was hot like it is now, we didn't get much sleep at night. We tossed and turned, and so out there on the road, we'd be just totally exhausted. At least 2 of us, including myself, believe it or not, fell asleep on our bikes as we were riding. Luckily, I rode into a clump of weeds and didn't get hurt very bad, but that's just an example of how tired we were. The thing is about this or the most important thing is, I think, with all of these rides and all of the teams that have come since, is that they stick together. They help each other, and they discovered how strong they are. This ride, the 84 ride, gave me the confidence to take on future challenges, and that's what we hope these rides do for these kids, is to not be afraid, to have the confidence to go on to the next challenge. But it provides our riders with the strength and confidence, I think, to really do a lot of good things. We have doctors, nurses, attorneys, you name it. We have a lot of professionals out there that have done this ride, that I think the ride just gave them the momentum to do this, to do what they do now. So with that, I'll introduce our first rider here from this year, Jenny Cleese. She from Stillwell. She was a strong rider out there, really encouraging teammate, and I want to let her talk about what she experienced out there.
CO everyone, like he said, I'm Jenny Cleese. I'm 25 years old, and I'm from Stillwell. Thankfully, he wasn't in charge of training us, so we didn't have to run up and down hills like he said he was. I originally wanted to do the ride because I had a friend who did it in a previous year, and when she came back, she said it's just this life-changing experience. You learn so much about yourself. You're challenging yourself not only physically, but emotionally through this whole process. And you're learning so much about our history. And so when she told me that, I was like, this is just something I have to be a part of. And so I applied, and here we are. Like he said, we started in New Echota, Georgia, and then we rode all the way back here to Tahlequah, Oklahoma, so 950 miles. During the training, we read 2 different books, and while we were going throughout the ride, we would make different stops, and we would just have people like Will or Jack Baker, and they would talk to us about different pieces in the book, and they would say, like, this is where we're standing is where this was happening. And so I think that's an opportunity I probably wouldn't have had if it weren't for this program. One of the most memorable stops for me was Mantle Rock. And so this is a place where our ancestors had to stop because the river was frozen, so they couldn't ferry across the river, so they had to stay here, and they didn't know for how long. And so they had to make a lot of hard decisions, and one of the hardest was that many mothers were giving away their babies because that's the only chance that they had. And so putting yourself in those shoes, that's just an unimaginable decision to make. And the strength that it took and the sacrifices that they made for us to be here is incredible. A funny memory is I remember the marshal had rode the ride out the night before, and he was like, yeah, they paved the road, and Will was like, yeah, that road was really bad before, so you better be glad it's paved. And we're going, and it is miles of dirt road. And so you're just bouncing, and you're holding onto your bike, hoping you don't fall over. And I remember thinking, I was like, man, when I get a hold of Kyle, when I come back, we're gonna have a word about this road, because someone lied to me. And one more place that I remember really well is that there's a hill in Missouri called the Wall. And you would know why it's called the Wall if you saw it. It is just straight 90-degree angle. You're just going up. And I remember halfway through, you're just holding onto your handles and you're pedaling and you're like, man, this is tough. How am I going to make it? And I remember thinking, there's no way that my granny could walk up this. And so to really put yourself in those shoes and putting your family in those shoes changes your perspective on everything. And so I would tell anyone that's thinking about doing the ride, or if you know anyone that wants to do the ride, that you 100% should do it. Like, I think that you would regret not signing up and doing it rather than just applying and trying it. And I don't think that you would ever regret doing this ride, because it really is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that I can't say thank you enough for giving me. So thank you.
CO, I'm Kyle Holmes. I'm 25 and I'm from Tahlequah. So one of the reasons why I wanted to do the ride was growing up, I didn't know a lot about my history and where we came from. My grandpa is a first language speaker, and growing up he didn't have those stories passed down to him. So he's the reason why I did the ride, so I could go on and pass stuff to him and just what our family went through, because he didn't know any of it. So like Jenny said, a few of my memorable moments were Blythe's Ferry. So Blythe's Ferry is the second day of the ride, and Jenny was actually lead that day, and I was her second, and we were just going through it mentally that day. It was a long and hot day. So getting to Blythe's Ferry was a little bit of emotional. We walked a little bit of this nature trail to get to the boat ramp, and I remember just walking next to Jenny, and everyone, it was quiet. We were all tired, no one was talking, and walking on this trail, all you could hear was our footsteps on the gravel. And it just brought you back to our ancestors having to walk just quiet, tired, and just sad about leaving their lands. And then getting on the boat with Jenny, we held hands and cried the whole time across the river. And I remember looking back at what would have, our ancestors looked back at what would have been the last glimpse of their homelands. And I remember looking back, seeing that, and then also seeing our teammates who still haven't crossed the river yet, thinking back to our ancestors who were looking back at their families and not knowing when's the next time they'll get to see them. Us crossing, we knew we were going to see our teammates in another 5-10 minutes. So that was very emotional, just thinking, oh, that could have been my family on the other side of that river, and who knows when I would have seen them again, despite everything. And then getting across the river together, we all held hands, we had a good cry, we ended up having a big circle, and we all talked about what we were feeling, because as it was the second day of the ride, we were still meshing as a team with the Eastern band. So it was very tough mentally, just having to come together as a team. And then I think another memorable moment was going up Cumberland, the Cumberland Plateau, as Will likes to correct us all the time. So there's 2 mountains to Cumberland. The first one, I remember being so nervous because my RTR journey was a little different. I applied in September of 2023. I got accepted in December of 2024, and I trained 6 months, got out to Cherokee, North Carolina, and on one of our training rides, I broke my collarbone. My other teammate broke her arm. And so we were unable to do the ride. We got pretty depressed, but we had each other. We were encouraged to apply again that next year, and we both were fortunate enough to be selected again for this year's team. So going up Cumberland was in my mind for 2 years, and I was so nervous. And then I'm so thankful for Jenny because she stayed with me going up both of the mountains, and I remember just being mentally and physically exhausted, and Jenny was just right there. We're almost there, Kai, we're almost there. And looking back, I'm so thankful for her going up Cumberland. And I kept telling her, I said, you can leave me, you can go ahead, because I knew she could go if she wanted to. And she said, no, I'm staying right here. So I'm very, very thankful for Jenny.
We're almost there.
Yes, I found out when we got to the top. And then as she mentioned Missouri, everyone mentions Missouri. It's probably one of the hardest states you'll go through. It's all just up and down, up and down. I remember feeling my strongest in Missouri. I think by that time, as a team, we're all pretty meshed together. We all learned how to draft off of each other. So getting up those hills, I stayed behind one of my Eastern Band teammates, and he shot me up all those hills. So I'm thankful for what this ride has given me, and the confidence and the perseverance it's shown me and myself, and I would encourage anybody to apply.
CO, Todd Enlow Dakodo. So I'm going to tell you a few funny things, an emotional thing, and hopefully an inspiring thing. So somewhat of a funny thing, Chief Smith at the time had asked me if I would consider working on a project called Leadership. And I was like, yeah, sure, what does that mean? And he goes, I don't know, you got to figure that out. And so I'd been doing it for a few months, and we had some things going with looking at partnerships between Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and Boys and Girls Club and other organizations. And he came through my office one day and he said, hey, Todd, you ride bikes, right? And I said, well, yeah, I ride a mountain bike, tool around a little bit. And he's like, well, they did that bike ride in 1984. And I said, yeah. He goes, we should redo that. And I was like, yeah, we should. About a month later, he came back through and he said, so how's the bike ride coming? And I was like, really good. Doing a lot of research with Jack Baker. And so I immediately called Jack Baker and I said, I need your help immediately. So Jack and I we flew out in a little chartered plane to Chattanooga, Tennessee, rented a Mitsubishi Diamante, That car, hopefully none of you ever rented it afterwards because it's never the same. But we drove the northern route as close as we could. And we would go up and down dirt roads for 12 miles and get to a spot and go realize that it's a dead end. And so Jack was driving, sharing stories, and I had atlases in my lap along with a laptop and a GPS device and 2 cell phones, trying to map all this out and denote where we were going. And so that was when I learned my genealogy, actually standing at Nancy Ward's gravesite. And Jack looked at me and he said, "Todd, aren't you a descendant of Nancy Ward?" And I said, "I don't know." And he said, "I think you are. Hang on just a second." And he called some random guy and he said, "Todd, who's your parents?" And I said, "Clyde and Ellen." He goes, yeah, Clyde and Ellen. Yeah, okay, all right, yeah, okay. All right, thanks a lot. What I didn't know, he was on the phone with a gentleman named David Hampton. And David confirmed within 10 seconds that I was a descendant of Nancy Ward and Peter Hildebrand and several others. And, it really made an impact on me knowing that at that point in time. And so that was one of the things we try to do with the future writers, is to deliver the genealogy. That way when they knew that they were at Eric Conrad's cabin, that those 4 writers were descendants of Eric Conrad. And so here's a couple of additional funnies. One is, first day of the ride in 2009, I am lost. So we had taken all that information and we did our first test run of putting everything into a GPS device. And we had 2. One was the primary, the other was the backup. And so cell phones didn't have all the GPS equipment that they do today. And so we had those 2 pieces. And I was the lead writer every day because we were trying to figure all of this stuff out. And so we were riding along and I was like, man, none of this seems familiar to me. But the GPS says turn right. And so I'd turn right and I was like, man, it just doesn't look familiar. And Jack Baker flies up in a car, just hair sticking out. He's like, "What are you doing?" And I said, I'm turning. He's like, "You're like 14 miles off of the course." I learned that there was a little known piece in there that says follow the best route or follow the route we told it to. But the default setting on those little devices were follow the best route. And so it was rerouting us everywhere. And so Jack just said, "Just follow me for the rest of the day." Fortunately, we were able to figure that out. And then, so obviously there's a little bit of humor throughout every day. There were bike riders and parents and funny stories. And I think that's one of the things that was important to us, to be able to laugh a little bit each and every day, because there was so much emotion that we went through every day. And then, so that will transition me into the slightly emotional part of the story. So, we talked a lot about death and people that passed and the memories of walking down dirt roads and riding ferry boats across that were quiet and solemn as we made our trek across the river. Oddly enough, Jack Baker always had to pay $100 to get us across the ferry because I never had cash. And somehow or another, Jack Baker always had a $100 bill. And so in 2010, my dad had a long bout with hepatitis C, which had affected his liver, and he had managed it for years and years and years, and had a liver transplant in 2007 and had been doing quite well. And one of the last, I was not going to cry, one of the last photos I have with him was on the day that we left. And he looked very well. And so we made our trek out, and we made it to New Echota. We started the ride, and we made it to Centerton, Tennessee, just southeast of Nashville. And we got in that day, and my wife had called me several times, and she said, "You need to make your way home. Your dad's not going to make it." Hardest conversation I've ever had to do was with the bike riders, to tell them that I'm going to have to leave that family to go join another family. And the reason I wanted to share that with you is all of the stories of how incredible all of that is. It just pierced me to know that our ancestors dealt with that each and every day, from infants to grandparents to brothers to sisters to parents to spouses, every day, and they continued on that journey. And so sure enough, I flew out the next morning at 6 a.m. and made my way, got to spend a few hours with my dad, and he passed about 12 hours after I made it to Oklahoma City. And spent time with our family and my mom, and it just weighed on the back of my mind that these riders are progressing that I'd spent so much time with, that I needed to get back to them. And so I rejoined the riders in Springfield, Illinois, and rode the rest of the way. And what was amazing to me is the leadership that each of those riders took on in the absence. And I was no longer the leader. I was just the guy on the bike ride. And so that is how I will wrap up my comments. Is I honestly believe that out of this bike ride, we have produced the next principal chief of the Cherokee Nation. We just don't know who it is yet, because of the understanding of history and traditions and pain and adversity, yet perseverance to be able to triumph through that. And so when I worked with the bike ride, we would gather up in a hotel room in Stillwell and tell each and every one of the riders that this is an investment that the Cherokee Nation has made in each and every one of them. Not the bike ride, not the gear, or not the bikes, not the gear, not the shoes, none of that. It's the investment is in you, because not everybody's going to get the opportunity to have this same experience. And so I said, remember that in the future. There's Trail of Tears Association, there's speaking engagements just like this to be able to share that, because the public needs to be reminded of this, and our citizens need to be reminded of the perseverance that they can triumph over anything, and I mean absolutely anything. So you may be staring at your next chief and deputy chief right here on this stage. So thank you guys very much.